Hello everyone, and welcome back to 3 AM Archives, where darkness meets tranquility. I know many of you use these videos to sleep, but before you drift off, I'd love to know which corner of the world you're listening from. Feel free to share in the comments. If these tales help ease you into slumber, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, dim your lights, find your most comfortable position, and let's begin.
I was elbow deep in baby's breath when the bell chimed. 6 a.m., an hour before opening. Red roses overflowed every surface of Madeline's flower boutique, and my fingers already ached from dethorning the Valentine's Day orders. 3 months at this job, and I still jumped at every chime of that bell. After David left, taking our flower shop dreams with him to California and his new fiancée, I'd needed any port in the storm. Madeline's had hired me on the spot, no questions asked. No references required. Just a knowing smile from Jenny as she handed me an apron, like she could smell the heartbreak on me. I'd thought arranging other people's love stories would hurt. Instead, it felt like armor. Their joy couldn't touch me behind my fortress of baby's breath and ribbon. Even today, Valentine's Day, I was safely numb. Or so I thought. The old woman stood at the counter like she'd materialized from the morning mist. Her silver hair hung in a braid to her waist, and her black dress seemed to absorb the shop's warm lighting. I straightened, brushing petals from my apron. "I'm sorry, we're not open." One black rose. Her fingers, gnarled like tree roots, placed an ancient gold coin on the counter. The metal gleamed with symbols that seemed to writhe and reshape themselves as I watched. Each one whispered of heartbreak, of deals made in moments of deepest despair. This wasn't payment for flowers. It was payment for something far darker, a contract signed in tears instead of ink. "We don't carry..." I turned toward our rose display, and there they were, a dozen black roses, pristine and impossible, their petals drinking in the light like holes in reality. I hadn't ordered them, hadn't arranged them. When I turned back with one in hand, she was gone. The coin remained, burning cold against my palm. The morning rush hit like a tidal wave. Soccer moms in yoga pants, businessmen checking watches, teenage boys clutching wadded cash, all desperate for their Valentine's arrangements. I moved on autopilot, wrapping bouquets and swiping cards. "Those are perfect." A man in a tear-stained suit pressed his credit card into my hand. His wedding ring was missing, leaving a pale band of skin. "One black rose, please." My stomach clenched. 3 more customers asked for them before noon. A divorcee with mascara tracks down her cheeks. A widow still wearing her husband's old sweater. A college kid with red-rimmed eyes clutching a Dear John letter. During a brief lull, I checked the back room for more supplies. The black roses had multiplied, climbing the walls in thick vines that hadn't been there an hour before. Their thorns seemed to twist toward me as I passed. My fingers shook as I pulled up the shop's sales records. Black roses appeared in every Valentine's Day transaction for the past 5 years, but the customers' names led to dead ends. No social media presence, no current addresses. They'd vanished like morning dew, leaving only wilted petals and gold coins that no bank would accept. The bell chimed again. A woman in a red dress wrapped her arms around herself, mascara running down her cheeks. "Please," she whispered. "I heard you have something special. Something that makes the pain stop." Behind her, the black roses pulsed like beating hearts. "Where did you hear about the special roses?" I gripped the counter's edge, my knuckles white. She dabbed her eyes with a crumpled tissue. "Everyone knows. When you're desperate enough, Madeline's has what you need." My co-worker, Jenny, appeared from the stockroom. Dark soil clung to her usually pristine apron. "Megan, have you seen the ledger? Miss Madeline needs it for inventory." Her smile was too wide, her eyes too bright. "No, The register drawer popped open on its own. Inside, beneath the cash tray, a leather-bound book pulsed like a living thing. Jenny's smile stretched wider. My fingers found the ledger, its leather warm and slick like skin. Power thrummed beneath its cover. This wasn't just a record book, but the source of Miss Madeline's magic itself. Each contract, each surrendered soul, was bound within these pages. The book fell open, Hundreds of names written in a handwriting that moved like dying insects across the page, stretching back centuries. Next to each name was a date, a coin marking, and a simple note. Payment received, transformation completed. This was her spellbook, her battery, the anchor that kept her garden of lost souls growing. I recognized the last name. Angela Peters, the previous florist. The ink was still wet, the letters squirming as her humanity drained away into Miss Madeline's garden. The sunlight dimmed outside, though it was barely afternoon. Through the front windows, I saw more customers approaching. Their faces were hungry, desperate, and behind me, the black roses had spread, covering the walls like a living wallpaper of darkness. Jenny placed a cold hand on my shoulder. Miss Madeline would like to see you in the basement. About your performance today. I'd worked here 3 months. We didn't have a basement. The floor beneath the register began to sink, steps appearing in the ancient wood. The smell of soil and copper wafted up, along with the sound of voices chanting in a language that made my teeth ache. Don't keep her waiting. Jenny's fingers dug into my shoulder. She has such plans for you, just like all the others who came looking for the Black Rose special. The bell chimed again. A young man entered, tears streaming down his face, clutching a handful of gold coins that couldn't possibly exist. I twisted away from Jenny's grip, her nails leaving scratches through my sleeve. The young man stumbled to the counter, coins spilling across the surface. Each one bore the same twisted symbols as the first soul contracts that would bind him to Miss Madeline's garden. The coins weren't just payment. They were promises. Promises to surrender your humanity, to let your grief be transformed into something ancient and hungry and green. Please, he choked out. My fiancée, yesterday. His grief was a tangible thing, filling the shop like smoke. I could see why the coins appeared to those in deepest despair. They offered an escape, a chance to become something that could never feel heartbreak again. Listen to me. I grabbed his arm, feeling Jenny loom behind me. You need to run. These aren't normal flowers. The people who buy them, they find peace. A new voice, ancient as churchyard soil, echoed from the basement stairs. Miss Madeline emerged, though she'd never had a physical form in the 3 months I'd worked here. Just a name on my paychecks, a presence in the shadows. She wore a dress of writhing thorns, her skin the same impossible black as the roses. Where her eyes should have been, petals unfurled. Such pain you carry. She reached for the young man with fingers that lengthened into vines. All of you, such exquisite desperation, perfect for our garden. The customers I'd turned away filtered in through the front door, but they weren't human anymore. I watched in horror as their skins split like overripe fruit, dark sap oozing from the cracks. Beneath the human shell, green tendrils writhed and stretched, bursting through flesh that crumbled like autumn leaves. The sound was like celery snapping mixed with wet, tearing silk. The air filled with the cloying scent of compost and sweet decay, of flowers rotting in stagnant water. Their screams turned to sighs as thorny vines replaced vocal cords, black roses bursting from their mouths and blooming where their hearts had been. Angela Peters was among them, her name tag still pinned to a chest of twisted vines. Her eyes had become dark hollows filled with squirming roots, and her hair writhed with tiny, hungry shoots reaching for the light. I grabbed a fistful of red roses, wielding them like a torch. The plant people backed away, their wooden faces contorting. The young man snapped out of his trance, screaming at what he saw. Run! I shoved him toward the door. Don't look back! The basement stairs were spreading, a maw of darkness threatening to swallow the shop. Miss Madeline's form swelled, thorny vines shooting toward me like spears. I dove behind the counter as the vines shattered the glass display case, sending shards and petals raining down. The pure roses in my hand hummed with an energy I'd never felt before, almost like they were eager for battle. I had one chance. Rolling to my feet, I whipped the roses in a wide arc, their stems whistling through the air. Where they struck Miss Madeline's vines, they left smoking welts, like holy water on demon flesh. She recoiled with a shriek, but more tendrils shot from her writhing form. I grabbed another bouquet, weaving the roses into a makeshift whip. Their thorns, natural, pure thorns, caught and tore at the corrupted plant flesh. Jenny lunged at me from behind, but I was ready. I thrust a long-stemmed rose through her chest like a rapier. Where it pierced her wooden skin, cracks of golden light spread outward. She staggered back, black rose petals falling from her disintegrating form. I hurled the roses into the mass of writhing vines, snatching the lighter we used for ribbon curling from beneath the counter. The red roses struck true, tangling in Miss Madeline's thorny flesh. Each point of contact blazed like a small sun. She shrieked, a sound like winter wind through dead branches. "The ledger!" Ms. Madeline's form began to splinter. "The contracts! Our anchors to this world!" Her thorny body twisted in desperation. Each burning page released another soul, dissolved another dark bargain. I dropped the burning book into the basement stairwell and flung the coins after it. The contracts and their payments, source and symbol of her power, falling together into the void. Jenny's skin began to ripple, then split. Not like human flesh, but like a flower's petals browning and curling back. The sound was wet, organic, like roots breaking through soil. Her bones crackled as they turned to woody stems, her muscles unwinding into ropey vines. The sharp green smell of crushed stems mixed with the earthier scent of mulch and grave soil. Dark sap dripped from her transforming lips as she smiled. "It doesn't hurt, Megan," she sighed, her voice thick with pollen. "Not like loving did. The garden takes away all that messy humanity." Her fingers lengthened into thorny tendrils, joints popping and reforming like branches in a storm. "Join us in the soil. Let your heart take root." The shop was burning now, green flames consuming decades of dark bargains. The basement stairs collapsed, taking Miss Madeline with them. The plant people crumbled to ash, their final expressions almost peaceful. I ran. Behind me, the shop imploded with a sound like 1,000 breaking hearts. Hours later, I sat in my apartment, hands still shaking as I scrolled through news reports. The fire department found nothing. No basement, no bodies, no evidence of the nightmare I'd survived. Just a burned-out flower shop. My phone buzzed. A job listing notification. Experienced florist needed. Madeline's Flower Boutique. New location opening soon. Competitive salary, full benefits. Must be willing to work Valentine's Day. Special botanical knowledge a plus. Interview in person only. Below was an address across town. As I stared at my phone, a single black petal drifted past my window, though no flowers grew nearby. It pressed against the glass like a hungry hand, then vanished into the night. I deleted the notification. But somewhere in the city, I knew, someone's heart was breaking, and in the darkness, ancient coins were changing hands, black roses were blooming, and Miss Madeline was preparing her garden for a new season of growth. After all, love and its aftermath is eternal.
The first thing I noticed was the couple in booth 7. They sat motionless, staring at each other across their untouched creme brulee. Their faces were slack, drained of color, while a thin sheen of sweat glistened on their foreheads. But their eyes blazed with an unnatural intensity, pupils dilated to black holes that threatened to swallow the world. I'd seen a lot in 15 years as a health inspector, but something about that couple made my pen pause over my clipboard. Around them, liqueur throbbed with Valentine's Day energy, but something felt off-rhythm, discordant. Red roses adorned every table, their perfume mixing with the aromas of seared meat and truffle oil, though the flowers seemed too perfect, each bloom identical, as if stamped from the same mold. Couples fed each other chocolate-dipped strawberries, their movements synchronized like mechanical dolls. A waiter glided between tables, his smile fixed at precisely 45 degrees, never wavering even as he spoke. When he poured wine, the couples lifted their glasses in perfect unison, a choreographed dance they couldn't possibly have rehearsed. The maitre d' materialized at my elbow, moving so silently I hadn't even seen his reflection in the window. Inspector Patel, what an unexpected pleasure. His smile reminded me of a shark's all teeth and no warmth, with a strange metallic glint that couldn't be blamed on dental work. When he blinked, his eyelids closed sideways. "I trust you'll find everything in order as always." Something about his confidence nagged at me. He should have been more worried. Liqueur had failed 3 preliminary inspections in the past year, but each time, my supervisor had conducted the follow-up personally. The violations had always been cleared without documentation. I tapped my pen against the violation notice in my pocket. 3 anonymous complaints in 1 week about their signature cocktail, Cupid's Arrow, reports of extreme behavioral changes, missing time, and most disturbing, an addictive euphoria that left patrons desperate for more. Each previous complaint had mysteriously vanished from our system before follow-up, and 2 other inspectors had been reassigned the day before their scheduled visits. When I'd questioned this, my supervisor had simply smiled and said something about administrative efficiency. "Just a routine inspection, Mr. Valentine." I glanced at the couple again. The woman's hand trembled as she reached for her water glass, her movements jerky like a marionette with tangled strings. The maitre d' stepped smoothly between us, blocking my view. "Shall we begin in the kitchen?" "The bar first, I think." I moved past him, noting how his polished composure cracked for just a fraction of a second. The bar was a masterpiece of mahogany and brass, bottles gleaming like jewels in the intimate lighting, though the shadows they cast seemed to writhe and twist when I wasn't looking directly at them. Behind it, a bartender with sleeve tattoos of intertwined hearts was preparing the infamous cocktail. The hearts seemed to beat in time with his movements, the ink rippling beneath his skin. Every few seconds, all the patrons at the bar would sip their drinks in perfect synchronization, then set their glasses down with an identical soft clink. The liquid glowed an impossible shade of pink, like nothing I'd ever seen in nature or artificial coloring. "What gives it that distinctive color?" I asked, keeping my tone casual as I made notes. The bartender's hands stuttered in their choreographed dance. "Proprietary blend, house secret." I leaned closer, pretending to examine the bottles on display. That's when I caught the metallic tang beneath the sweet fragrance, like copper pennies or blood. "I'll need to see the storage area." "Of course." The bartender gestured to a door marked "Employees Only." "Right through there, past the wine rack." The storage room was immaculate, too immaculate. Every bottle faced forward, every label perfectly aligned. But there, behind a rack of vintage Bordeaux, something reflected the light. I shifted the bottles aside to reveal a seam in the wall, recently painted over but distinct to a trained eye. A whispered conversation drifted through the wall. "The batch from booth 7 is almost ready for extraction." "Good. The demand for pure passion has tripled since last Valentine's. The Tokyo venue can't keep up." "What about the ones in 12? They're producing unprecedented levels of infatuation." "Harvest them before it peaks. Send the data to the London R&D team. They're still trying to replicate those levels at the concert halls." "And the amusement park project?" "Proceeding as planned. Children's joy is difficult to stabilize, but the yield potential is incredible." My heart hammered against my ribs as I copied down every word. Behind me, a floorboard creaked. I spun around to find the bartender, his tattooed hearts writhing in the shadows. "Finding everything you need, Inspector?" A muscle twitched in his jaw. "Almost." I indicated the hidden door. "What's behind there?" His smile was all wrong, too wide and tight. "Just additional storage. Would you like me to open it for you?" I nodded, my mouth dry as dust. As he reached for the concealed latch, I noticed dark stains under his fingernails, stains the exact shade of Cupid's Arrow. The door swung open with a pneumatic hiss. The stench hit me first, sickly sweet with an undercurrent of raw meat. The bartender flicked on a light, revealing rows of industrial refrigerators with glass doors. Inside each, bottles of varying sizes glowed with different colored liquids. Sunrise orange for joy that fizzed and sparked like champagne bubbles. Deep crimson for passion that moved like hot oil. Electric blue for serenity that flowed thick and smooth as honey. But it was the pink ones that drew my eye. The exact shade of Cupid's Arrow. Love distilled into its purest form, shimmering with an opalescent shine like mother of pearl. "Our private stock," the bartender said, his tattoos seeming to pulse in the fluorescent lighting. "Specialty ingredients for our most discerning customers." He lifted one of the bottles, swirling its contents. Pure joy from a child's first bicycle ride. See how it sparkles? The bubbles carry echoes of laughter. His fingers traced another bottle, this one a deep purple. Freshly harvested grief, thick as molasses with an aftertaste that lingers for hours. The tears add a particular salinity. I stepped closer to one of the fridges, my reflection ghostly in the glass. Behind the bottles, something moved. I squinted, pressing closer, until I realized I was looking at a second set of doors beyond the refrigerators, doors with small observation windows. A face appeared in one of the windows, a woman, her features contorted in ecstasy or agony. I couldn't tell which. She pressed her palm against the glass, mouth forming words I couldn't hear. Then she was yanked away, leaving only a foggy handprint. What was that? I spun toward the bartender, but he was already moving. His fist connected with my jaw, sending me stumbling backward into the shelves. Bottles rattled. One fell, shattering at my feet. The liquid splashed my shoes, and immediately my feet began to tingle. I kicked off my shoes as the leather started to dissolve. You shouldn't have come down here. The bartender advanced, producing a syringe filled with pink liquid from his pocket. But since you did, we could use someone with your intensity, the fear you're producing right now. It's exquisite. I grabbed the nearest bottle and hurled it at his head. He ducked, but the distraction gave me enough time to bolt past him. My sock-clad feet slipped on the wet floor as I ran. Behind me, I heard doors opening, multiple sets of footsteps joining the pursuit. The maitre d's voice echoed through hidden speakers. Contain the inspector. He'll make an excellent addition to tonight's special menu. I burst through the storage room, knocking over the wine rack. Bottles shattered, filling the air with the scent of wine and broken dreams. The main bar was empty now. When had they cleared out the customers? The couple from booth 7 still sat in their seats, but now I could see the thin tubes running from their arms down through holes drilled in the floor. Their eyes were rolled back, showing only whites, as machines beneath their table pumped and whirred. I had to get out, had to tell someone. My phone was in my pocket. I pulled it out as I ran, but something was wrong with the screen. The display rippled like disturbed water, colors bleeding together. Around me, the harvested emotions must have been thick in the air. I could taste them on my tongue, feel them pressing against my skin. My phone's screen began to pulse in rhythm with the machines beneath the tables, digital numbers and letters swirling into patterns that looked unsettlingly like faces in agony. The display filled with that familiar, sickening pink glow, the same shade as Cupid's arrow, the same color now threading through my veins. Of course, they wouldn't let anything electronic operate normally in here, not with the amount of emotional energy they were processing. I'd seen what their harvesting did to human minds. Why would silicon circuits fare any better? The front doors were locked. Of course they were locked. I could see other couples on the street, outside, walking hand in hand toward the restaurant, completely unaware. One woman pointed at me through the glass, her face concerned. I tried to wave her off, to warn her, but she was already reaching for the door handle. I turned and ran toward the kitchen. There had to be another way out. There always had to be another way out. The sound of the woman outside being greeted by the staff followed me. Welcome to Le Coeur. You're just in time for our Valentine's Day special. The kitchen was abandoned mid-service, pots still simmering on burners, plates of half-garnished food left on counters. Steam billowed from a copper pot, carrying a scent that made my stomach clench. Not unpleasant, but somehow wrong, like artificial sweetener with a metallic aftertaste. I darted between the stainless steel prep tables, heading for the red exit sign at the back. My socks slipped on the greasy floor. From behind me came the rhythmic clicking of the maitre d's leather shoes, unhurried, confident. The more you run, Inspector Patel, the more potent your fear becomes. His voice carried over the hiss of burners and drone of hood vents. Can you feel it building? That delicious terror? I could. It crawled through my veins like ice water, making my hands shake as I reached for the exit door. Locked. I slammed my shoulder against it, but it didn't budge. A movement caught my eye, the walk-in freezer door slowly swinging open. A hand emerged from the darkness, beckoning. A woman's voice, barely a whisper. "In here, quickly." The maitre d's footsteps grew closer. I had no choice. I slipped into the freezer, and the woman pulled the door shut behind us. In the dim light, I recognized her as one of the line cooks I'd seen on previous inspections. Rebecca, I remembered. She'd always been quick with a smile, proud to show off her immaculate station. Now her face was gaunt, her eyes haunted. Her chef's whites hung loose on her frame, as if she'd been slowly disappearing into them. "You're the first inspector who's noticed," she whispered, hands trembling as she checked the door. "The others, they all drank what they were offered. But you saw through it, didn't you? Like I did. Too late." She rolled up her sleeve, revealing track marks that glowed faintly in the darkness. "It starts with a free drink, a Valentine's Day special. Try our Cupid's arrow, they say. It's made with love." Her bitter laugh caught in her throat. They weren't lying about that part. "There's a way out through the sub-basement," she continued, "but you have to see this first. They'll never let you leave if you don't understand what you're dealing with. And there's someone I need you to see. Someone they took from me." She led me past hanging meat to a stainless steel door set into the back wall. As she worked the lock, her hand brushed against a heart-shaped locket at her throat. "Helen gave me this, last Valentine's Day, right before..." She swallowed hard. "We were going to get married this spring." The door opened onto a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The temperature rose with each step down, along with a rhythmic thumping that vibrated through the walls. It reminded me of a heartbeat, but wrong, too mechanical, too precise. The sub-basement was a maze of pipes and machinery, all leading to a central chamber. Rebecca pressed her finger to her lips and pointed. Through a large observation window, I saw what looked like a medical lab. People in white coats moved between rows of reclining chairs. No, not chairs. They were more like torture devices, with straps and needles and tubes running to massive distillation tanks. In each chair lay a person, electrodes attached to their temples. Some writhed in their restraints, others lay still as death. Above each chair, a monitor displayed shifting colors and graphs. Rebecca's hand pressed against the glass, reaching toward one specific figure. A woman with long dark hair, her face contorted in what might have been ecstasy or agony. "Helen," Rebecca breathed, her voice breaking. "They're extracting pure emotions, harvesting them. Love, passion, desire, but also fear, jealousy, desperation. Each one distilled into its purest form and served up in cocktails to their wealthy clients." Her fingers traced her wife's outline on the glass. "They said Helen was special. The purity of her love, her capacity for joy. They said they'd never seen readings like hers before. She's been their star producer for 14 months now. Sometimes when I'm working upstairs, I can feel her, like she's reaching for me through the floor." Rebecca's other hand clutched her locket. "I took this job to stay close to her. I keep thinking if I watch long enough, learn enough, I'll find a way to get her out. But they watch me too carefully, and the longer I stay..." She showed me her glowing veins again. "The chemicals get into you, through the air, through your skin. Sometimes I catch myself thinking about how exquisite her suffering must taste." Before I could respond, an alarm blared. Red lights began flashing. "They know you're down here." She shoved me toward a maintenance tunnel. "Run, tell everyone, but be careful once you've been exposed." She pulled up her sleeve, revealing track marks that glowed faintly pink in the dark. The alarm grew louder. Behind us, doors burst open. The cook pushed me into the tunnel. "Go!" I crawled through the narrow space as fast as I could, trying not to think about the warm, wet things my hands kept touching in the dark. The cook's screams echoed behind me, cutting off abruptly. The tunnel ended at a storm drain. I emerged into an alley behind the restaurant, gulping the cold night air. My hands were shaking harder now, but not just from fear. In the streetlight, I could see my veins beginning to glow with a familiar pink tinge. A couple walked past the alley's entrance, heading toward Liqueur's front door. I opened my mouth to warn them, but stopped. My tongue darted out, involuntarily licking my lips. I could smell them. Their excitement, their anticipation, their love. And God help me, it smelled delicious. My phone rang, actually rang this time, making me jump. The caller ID showed my supervisor's number. My hands trembled as I answered. Patel, my supervisor's voice crackled. Got a call from Liqueur's owners. They say you're conducting an unauthorized inspection? I pressed myself against the alley wall, watching another couple float past, their happiness trailing behind them like visible vapor. I could taste it on my tongue. Listen to me. The restaurant, they're doing something to people, harvesting emotions. I've seen the equipment, the victims. We need police, FBI, someone. The owners said you might be distressed. His tone shifted, became soothing, too soothing. They're sending someone to help. Just stay where you are. The line went dead. Down the alley, a door opened. Light spilled out, along with the maitre d's silhouette. I ran. The city streets blurred past. Every person I passed hit me with waves of emotion. Anger from a man arguing on his phone, sharp and acrid like wasabi burning the back of my throat. Joy from a woman walking her dog, effervescent and bright, dancing across my tongue like popping candy. Love from an elderly couple sharing a bench, warm and rich like aged whiskey with undertones of caramel and wood smoke. The feelings crashed over me like breaking waves, each one more intoxicating than the last. A child's disappointment tasted of bitter almonds, while a teenager's first kiss sparkled like mint frost. A businessman's anxiety felt like cold mercury rolling under my skin, and a bride's anticipation floated past like cotton candy dissolving into champagne. Each emotion had its own texture, its own weight in the air. Fear was metallic and sharp, crystallizing like frost on windows. Jealousy clung like oil, thick and bitter. Happiness bounced and sparked like static electricity, while contentment settled soft and heavy as fog. And love. Love was the most complex of all, layered like a fine wine. Sweet rush of infatuation on top, deep umami notes of commitment beneath, finished with the subtle minerality of trust. I finally stopped in front of the health department building, gasping for air. My skin glowed faintly pink now, visible even through my clothes. In the reflection of the glass doors, I saw my pupils had expanded to black pools. Inside, I found the office dark except for one desk lamp. My supervisor sat waiting, a familiar pink cocktail sitting on his desk. Rough night? He lifted the glass in a toast. How long have you known? Known? Raj, I'm on the board of directors. He took a sip, sighing contentedly. We've had our eye on you for months. Your dedication, your passion for the job, the intensity of your emotions is quite remarkable. The door locked behind me with a click. Footsteps approached. The maitre d', the bartender, others I didn't recognize. The restaurant isn't just one location, you understand, my supervisor continued. We're expanding, franchising, and we need quality control inspectors who really understand our product. Someone who can ensure consistency across all our ventures, the restaurants, the nightclubs, the new theme park. He smiled thinly. Did you think Liqueur was the only one? There's a whole world of emotional refinement out there, Inspector. Dance clubs harvesting ecstasy, funeral homes, collecting grief, megachurches extracting religious fervor. He gestured to a wall of awards and certificates. We're just one division of a much larger enterprise. The culinary branch, you might say. He held out the cocktail glass. Our investors are particularly excited about the sports arena project. Can you imagine? 80,000 fans, all generating pure athletic triumph or crushing defeat. My hand reached for it involuntarily, drawn to the swirling pink liquid. I could see my reflection in it, my face transfigured by need. Don't fight it, the maitre d' purred. You've already absorbed enough through skin contact. Might as well enjoy the experience. They were right. I could feel it changing me, awakening new hungers, new sensitivities. The part of me that had been a health inspector for 15 years, the part that lived for protecting people, for uncovering dangerous truths, was still screaming. But even its screams were becoming fascinating. I found myself analyzing my own horror with clinical detachment, like a wine connoisseur parsing subtle notes of terror and revulsion. The violation notice in my pocket felt like a relic from another life. How many citations had I written, trying to quantify human suffering through bureaucratic checkboxes? How pedestrian. Now I could taste suffering directly, could feel it bloom on my tongue like an exotic spice. The fear response is particularly refined in those with strong moral convictions, my supervisor noted, watching me struggle. Something about the corruption of principles. It adds a unique bouquet to the final product, like bitter chocolate with an electric finish. Feel how it numbs the tongue while simultaneously heightening sensation. That's the cognitive dissonance crystallizing. He swirled his glass contemplatively. Though personally, I prefer the complex notes of disillusionment. The moment an idealist's faith shatters, that has a flavor profile somewhere between aged scotch and morning frost on metal. Simply extraordinary. He was right. I could feel my principles dissolving like sugar in acid, each ethical boundary melting away to reveal new possibilities. The couples walking past the window were no longer potential victims to be saved. They were ingredients waiting to be properly processed. I found myself categorizing them by emotional potential. The nervous young man about to propose, anxiety cut with hope, perfect for a champagne cocktail. The woman crying after a fight, distilled heartbreak, best served chilled. Part of me still fought, but I observed its struggles with growing fascination. The intensity of its despair was magnificent. I understood now why they had chosen me. Who better to help perfect their emotional harvesting than someone who felt everything so deeply? I lifted the glass to my lips, my hand no longer shaking. The liquid caught the light like liquid garnets, like fresh blood, like every passionate thing that had ever burned through human veins. The real artistry, the maitre d' murmured, is in the blending, in knowing exactly how much joy to cut with sorrow, how much love to temper with fear. You'll learn. Through the window, I watched couples walking hand in hand through the city, each one glowing with delectable emotions, ripe for harvest. Like fireflies, I thought. But no fireflies were too crude a metaphor. These were vintage wines walking on legs, complex cocktails of feeling just waiting to be distilled into their purest form. I drained the glass, savoring the burn of transformation. My clipboard clattered to the floor, forgotten, as my mind filled with recipes instead of regulations. The violation notice spilled from my pocket. My last report would remain forever unfinished. I had a new form of quality control to perfect now. I smiled, tasting the exquisite bouquet of my own corruption, and reached for the bottle to pour another glass.
My hands trembled as I checked the name tags for the 100th time. After 3 years of organizing these speed dating events, my personal crusade to help others find what I'd lost, you'd think I'd be used to it by now. But tonight, something was wrong with the registrations. Terribly wrong. I'd thrown myself into matchmaking after Michael's accident, as if every couple I brought together could somehow make up for the future we'd never have. My fingers went to his class ring on its chain around my neck, the metal worn smooth from 3 years of worried touching. The morning news had reported another accident on Highway 23, third one this month, and I'd taken the long way to avoid the endless parade of roadside crosses. The Baroque wallpaper of the Blackwood Hotel's ballroom seemed to breathe in the candlelight, and the antique chandelier cast prismatic shadows that shouldn't have been possible with modern bulbs. The air felt dense and stale, carrying the sickly sweet perfume of dying roses layered over something else. Something that reminded me of the formaldehyde tang of funeral homes. Each step I took made the floorboards whisper, though this room had been carpeted for decades. A throat cleared at the desk. "I'm here to check in. Michael Stevens." The pen slipped from my fingers, clattering against the mahogany table. My dead fiancé stood before me, perfect and whole, exactly as he'd looked the day before his accident 3 years ago. Same crooked smile, same blue-checked shirt, same small scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood bike crash. Except, hadn't the scar been on the right side? I remembered kissing it so many times, teasing him about that rusty old Schwinn. My head spun as I tried to hold on to the memory. This isn't... You can't. The room spun, darkness creeping at the edges of my vision. Michael reached for my hand with his left, but Michael had always been right-handed. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I stumbled backward, knocking over a vase of blood-red roses. The water spread across the ancient carpet like a stain. Through the window behind the registration desk, I could just make out the distant curve of Highway 23, its lights creating the same pattern they had the night of the crash. I'd memorized that bend in the road, the way the guardrail gleamed in headlights, how the shadows gathered in the valley below. Every morning I drove past it, and every morning I held my breath until I was safely around that curve. He caught the vase before it could shatter, his movements too smooth, too practiced. My Michael had always been endearingly clumsy. The night had started normally enough, just another Valentine's Day event to coordinate, or so I thought. But as the evening shadows lengthened across the Blackwoods Grand Ballroom, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The registration packets weren't cooperating. I'd printed 30 sets, but they kept coming up short no matter how many times I counted. Worse, the names seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. A scratchy recording of My Funny Valentine crackled through speakers I hadn't set up. The music sounded wrong, like it was being played backward underwater, each note lasting a fraction too long. I spun around, searching for their source. The ballroom had transformed while my back was turned. Heavy velvet curtains now draped the windows, though I distinctly remembered modern blinds. The electric sconces had become gas lamps, their flames dancing despite the lack of gas lines in the building. The carpet beneath my feet felt alternately too plush and threadbare, as if it couldn't decide which era it belonged to. Each breath tasted of mothballs and copper pennies. I rubbed my temples. Focus. Just focus. The hotel manager passed by the registration desk, his polite smile never quite reaching his eyes. Something about his movements seemed wrong, like his joints bent in directions human bones shouldn't allow. When he turned to straighten a centerpiece, his shadow stretched toward me instead of the window, its edges writhing with too many limbs. But when I blinked, everything looked normal again. The first guests would arrive soon for the Valentine's Day speed dating event. Everything had to be perfect. My reputation as an event coordinator depended on it. But my watch had stopped at 6:13, and my phone displayed nothing but static when I tried to check the time. The double doors creaked open. A woman in sleek modern business wear glided in. Her expensive perfume couldn't quite mask the briny scent of seawater and decay that followed her. I blinked, and suddenly she wore a 1950s pillbox hat and seamed stockings. Another blink. Her neck was bent at an impossible angle, dark bruises blossoming beneath her pearls. The air around her felt charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. One more blink, and she was modern again. But water dripped from her clothes onto the carpet, leaving no stain. The droplets sounded like a ticking clock when they hit the floor. She approached the registration desk, perfectly composed despite the seawater I could still see glistening in her hair. "I'm here for my soulmate." More guests filtered in, and with each arrival, reality seemed to splinter. A man in a crisp business suit flickered, his clothes transforming into a cavalry uniform, dark blood blooming across his chest where the Spanish bullet had found him in 1898. He kept touching the breast pocket of his uniform where an unopened letter still waited, a proposal he'd meant to send to his sweetheart back home. A teacher in a modern blazer shifted between decades, her horn-rimmed glasses cracking in slow motion as her face showed the burns from the schoolhouse fire. She died getting the last child out, and even now her ghostly hands kept making calming gestures, shushing sounds mixing with the crackle of phantom flames. The nurse's scrubs became a 1960s uniform, her surgical cap hiding the Depression-era exit wound she couldn't seem to remember. She paced the room checking on other guests, still trying to heal even in death. Her girlfriend trailed behind her in a matching uniform, both of them hiding their rings on chains around their necks. A love they'd had to keep secret in life, still secretive in death. The roses I'd arranged that morning rotted and bloomed and rotted again, their petals falling like drops of blood. A clock began to tick backward, and with each tick, the guests' deaths played out in reverse, bones knitting, Blood flowing upstream, bullets flying back into gun barrels, nooses unfurling, water being coughed from centuries-old lungs. From somewhere outside came the phantom screech of tires on wet asphalt, a sound I heard every time it rained on Highway 23. The accident reports called it a dead man's curve, but lately I'd begun to wonder if the road itself was hungry. The speed dating began, and immediately something was wrong with the timing. Each mini-date should have lasted 5 minutes, but participants were having entire relationships in the span of heartbeats. The air grew thick with decades of overlapping perfumes and colognes. Chanel Num 5, Old Spice, Love's Baby Soft, Drakkar Noir, mixing with the metallic tang of blood and the acrid smoke of old fires. At table 3, a young woman's green dress morphed into a 1960s shift dress, then into a black morning gown. The fabric rustled with the sound of autumn leaves and distant taps. Her partner's army fatigues became stained with mud and blood, a jungle rot creeping across his skin before vanishing again. The humid stench of the Mekong Delta briefly overwhelmed the ballroom's musty air. "Tommy, I thought I'd never see you again after Saigon." Her words caught as a phantom bullet hole appeared in his forehead, then sealed itself shut. The bell rang. Everyone shifted seats, but when I looked back, the same couple sat there, meeting again for the first time. His uniform was pristine once more. Then the rot returned. Then the bullet hole. Then pristine again. A temporal loop of love and death playing out like a skipping record. At table 7, an elderly man reached for his partner's hand, and I watched them cycle through decades. Young lovers in the 1940s, middle-aged in summer clothes, elderly in hospital gowns. Her hand withered with cancer before blooming back to youth. His heart attack played out in reverse, color returning to his lips, clutching chest relaxing. They died 6 months apart, him from a broken heart after losing her. Over and over and over they found each other, like a record skipping on their favorite song. At table 12, 2 women in poodle skirts shared a milkshake with 2 straws, giggling as their hands touched. Then they were in evening gowns, sneaking glances across a debutante ball. Then in their Sunday best at each other's weddings to men they didn't love. Then in their 80s, finally free to live together, only to have the house fire claim them both one winter night. Their fingers kept intertwining and separating, 50 years of hidden love playing out in endless loops. My clipboard displayed a list of participants I hadn't written. Next to each name was a date. Not a birth date, I realized with growing horror, but a death date. I dropped the clipboard, but the sound it made hitting the floor echoed like a funeral bell. "Miss?" A man touched my elbow. His name tag read Robert, but it flickered to deceased when he moved. "I've met the most wonderful woman. We were married for 50 years, you see. Lost her last spring to cancer. But she's here. She's really here." Through the ballroom's windows, I watched the endless stream of headlights on Highway 23. 3 more crosses had appeared this month alone. The local paper had run an article about making the road safer, widening the shoulders, adding guardrails. But I knew better now. Some roads develop a taste for tragedy. Some curves remember every car they've claimed. Michael appeared beside me, placing a steady hand on my shoulder. "Everything's going wonderfully, isn't it? Just like our first date at that Italian place on 5th. The memory jarred. We'd met at a coffee shop. He'd spilled his latte all over my resume. The Italian place had been our 3rd date. I stared at his perfect smile, too practiced, too symmetrical. The real Michael's smile had always been slightly crooked, higher on the left side than the right. The chandelier spun shadows across the walls, faster and faster. I caught a glimpse of the manager in its crystals, but his reflection showed something vast and dark, with countless eyes that all turned to watch me at once. When I looked behind me, he was just straightening his perfectly pressed uniform, but his smile seemed to contain too many teeth. The clock hands whirled counterclockwise, decades peeling away like dead skin. Every time I looked at a new couple, I remembered their obituaries: car crashes, heart attacks, house fires, suicides. Why did I know how they all died? The hotel's front desk was unmanned, covered in a thick layer of dust except for a single brass bell. In its polished surface, I saw the manager standing behind me, but his reflection wasn't wearing a hotel uniform. It was draped in shapes that hurt my eyes to look at, geometries that shouldn't exist in our reality. When I spun around, he wasn't there at all. I rang it, and the sound rippled through time itself. The registry book appeared, its pages yellowed and brittle. February 14th, 1954. Valentine's speed dating event. 30 participants. February 14th, 1955. Valentine's speed dating event. 30 participants. February 14th, 1956. Valentine's speed dating event. 30 participants. The same event, the same number of participants, every year. I flipped through the pages faster. The handwriting never changed. The names repeated. And there, in the staff section of each entry, my own signature. Identical, perfect, impossible. A photograph on the wall caught my eye. It showed the ballroom, decorated exactly as it was tonight, filled with couples in various periods of dress. I recognized every face. They were all in there right now, meeting and re-meeting, loving and losing, dying and returning. First time you've noticed? I whirled around. The hotel manager stood behind the desk, but the space around him seemed to bend and distort, as if reality itself was trying to escape his presence. His shadow pooled beneath him like spilled ink, occasionally rippling with shapes that resembled faces screaming in silence, though I hadn't heard him approach. His uniform was pristine 1950s style, his smile too wide, too knowing. "I don't understand," I whispered, but I did. God help me, I did. He slid the registry toward me, pointing to today's date. The ink was still wet. February 14th, 2025. Valentine's speed dating event. 30 participants, event coordinator. My name. Status, deceased. November 12th, 2022. Auto accident, Highway 23, mile marker 47. Dead Man's Curve. My fingers trembled as they traced the words. Behind me, through the office window, the steady stream of headlights on Highway 23 looked like a river of souls flowing into darkness, or maybe flowing back out. "This isn't real. I can't be." The manager's smile widened further, splitting his face like a scar, then splitting again and again until his features were a fractal pattern of teeth and darkness. "Why don't you go check on your guests? It's almost time for the final dance." I ran back toward the ballroom, but the hallway stretched endlessly before me, the Baroque wallpaper patterns writhing like snakes. Behind every door I passed, I heard them. Declarations of love, wedding vows, last words, funeral prayers, all happening simultaneously, eternally, in this place where time had lost all meaning. The ballroom doors finally opened to chaos. The air became a tapestry of sensations, the sharp sting of hospital disinfectant, the oily smoke of house fires, the crisp autumn leaves from a dozen fatal car crashes, all mingling with wedding cake fondant and funeral flowers. My teeth vibrated with the subsonic hum of 1,000 lost heartbeats. The floor rippled beneath my feet like a liquid, though it looked solid enough. Couples danced in and out of each other, their forms transparent, each revolution showing a new moment of their deaths. The temperature dropped and soared with each pair that passed, hypothermia cold, cremation heat, drowning wet, desert dry. A man spun his bride, her white dress dissolving into a hospital gown, IV lines trailing like ribbons. A woman dipped her partner, his suit becoming a firefighter's uniform, smoke curling from his lips. My grandfather waltzed past with his first wife, young, old, decomposed, young again, while engine parts from his fatal crash orbited them like deadly stars. A woman from last week's obituaries tangoed with her girlfriend, their bodies flickering between flesh and the charred remains of the house fire they never escaped. Each step left momentary impressions of their bones on the dance floor before the carpet swallowed them up. Michael stood in the center of it all, arms outstretched, waiting. For a moment, I saw him as he truly died, broken windshield diamonds studding his face, steering wheel crushing his chest, that final breath frosting in the winter air, before he shifted back to the perfect memory I'd been chasing all these years. But now I could see all the flaws in the forgery, the scar on the wrong side, the too perfect smile, The way he moved with an unnatural grace that my stumbling, laughing Michael had never possessed. His class ring around my neck grew ice cold. "You organize this event every year," the manager materialized beside me. "Every year you forget. Every year you remember. Every year you choose to stay." "Why?" he gestured to Michael. "Because love is the strongest anchor in death. Stronger than chains. Stronger than time. Look how beautiful it is. The dance of souls who couldn't let go." Michael's voice carried across the room. "Come home, sweetheart. We can be together again." But something wasn't right. His smile was too perfect, his words too practiced. I looked closer at the other couples and saw their expressions were vacant, their movements mechanical. This wasn't love. This was a parody of it, a cosmic record player stuck on repeat. The chandelier crashed down, missing me by inches. The walls rippled like water, and through them I glimpsed other versions of this night. Hundreds of them, thousands, stretching back through time. In each one, I chose Michael. In each one, I forgot. In each one, I died again and again. No more. I ran to the center of the room, where an ornate memorial shrine stood hidden in plain sight. Photos of the dead, locks of hair, wedding rings, love letters, all the anchors holding us here. "Stop!" The manager's face distorted, revealing something ancient and hungry beneath his human mask. "You'll destroy everything." I grabbed a candelabra. That's the point. As the flames caught the first photograph, the woman in the pillbox hat, I saw her death as it should have been, decades later, surrounded by grandchildren, her husband holding her hand as she drifted off in a sunlit room. The water in her lungs became peaceful breaths, then stillness. A wedding ring melted in the fire, and I glimpsed the cavalry officer dying at 93, telling war stories to his great-grandchildren, the Spanish bullet becoming nothing more than an old scar with a fond story attached. The teacher's glasses cracked in the heat, and through their shattered lenses, I saw her passing quietly in her sleep after a lifetime of changing young lives. The schoolhouse fire nothing but a distant nightmare that never was. Each item that burned showed me what should have been. The nurse retiring after 50 years of saving lives. Her girlfriend proudly holding her hand at the ceremony. The young soldier growing old enough to forget the jungles of Vietnam. That unopened love letter finally delivered. The school teacher watching her saved students graduate, no scent of smoke in her hair. The two women from the debutante ball celebrating their golden anniversary openly, proudly, their love no longer hidden. The elderly couple passing within moments of each other, holding hands one final time, neither forced to live without the other. All these futures that had been stolen, not by death, but by the inability to accept it. Each peaceful end that should have been, now finally granted. The flames rose higher, and the couples around me began to change. Their endless death loops transformed into peaceful final moments. The woman with cancer died pain-free, holding her wife's hand. The heart attack victim passed surrounded by family. The secret lovers found themselves young again, but this time in a world that would have let them love freely. One by one, their tortured expressions softened into acceptance, their forms flickering like old film. They began to fade, not in terror but in peace. Finally letting go. Michael reached for me one last time. "Please don't leave me again." I touched his cheek, feeling nothing but cold air. "I'm not leaving you. I'm setting us both free." The hotel collapsed inward like a dying star. The manager screamed in frequencies that shattered reality itself. And then, silence. I jerked awake at my desk in my apartment, drooling on a stack of event planning contracts. My phone showed 3 missed calls from a potential client wanting to book a Valentine's Day event. According to the news, the Blackwood Hotel had been demolished in 2019. No one remembered the speed dating events. No one remembered the manager. No one remembered me dying. But last night, as I drove past the empty lot where the hotel once stood, I swear I saw couples dancing in the ruins, their forms fading with the sunset. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Same time next year? M." I blocked the number and drove home the long way, avoiding Highway 23, where a cross still marked the spot where a woman died in 2022. A woman whose face I couldn't quite remember, whose name I wasn't ready to read. Some loves are meant to end. Some dances need to stop. Back home, I stood before my dresser, where Michael's things still filled a drawer I hadn't opened in 3 years. The class ring burned against my skin, no longer cold with supernatural chill, but warm with memories. I touched the worn metal one last time, remembering how he'd laughed when it got stuck on my thumb the night he let me try it on. Slowly, I unclasped the chain. The ring caught the last rays of sunset, and for a moment, I thought I saw other rings glinting inside it. All the wedding bands and promise rings and tokens of love that had burned in that otherworldly shrine. I placed it in a small velvet box, along with the key to his apartment I'd never returned, the movie tickets from our last date, the half-finished crossword we'd been working on that final Sunday morning. The next day, I donated the box to a local history museum. Not because I needed to forget, but because I finally understood that letting go doesn't mean losing the love. It means setting it free. I drive home every night with my high beams on, radio off, watching for ghostly couples on the side of the road. My neck feels lighter now, though sometimes my fingers still reach for a ring that's no longer there. And when I pass empty buildings at sunset, I never look too closely at the windows, because in the right light, at the right moment, you might see them all still dancing. And this time, they might invite you to join. But last week, I saw a flyer that made my blood run cold. Valentine's speed dating event. Find your soulmate at the historic Ravenwood Manor. The organizer's photo showed a woman I'd seen in the news just months ago, standing shell-shocked beside a plane crash site, clutching her fiancé's pilot wings. In the photo, she wore the same hollow smile I used to see in my mirror. Her eyes in the picture seemed to follow me as I walked past. And behind her, in the manor's gilt-framed windows, I swore I could see shadows dancing, and something much darker watching them all, wearing an all-too-familiar hotel manager's uniform. I should warn her. I should tell her what happens when grief becomes an anchor that even death can't break. But would I have listened 3 years ago if someone had tried to warn me? My phone buzzes. A text from an unknown number. The position of hotel manager is always open. Someone has to keep love alive. M. I delete the message, but I can't delete the memory of those dancing shadows, or the way the Ravenwood's windows seem to ripple like water in the sunset light, beckoning, inviting, hungry for new stories to add to its collection. The call came at midnight. I was already halfway up the mountain when my headlights caught the first snowflakes. Mountain Pines couple's retreat emerged from the darkness like a gothic mansion trying to masquerade as a spa resort, all sharp angles softened by modern materials and warm lighting. My wheels crunched over fresh gravel as I pulled up to the entrance. According to the emergency contact, the Bennetts were having a violent crisis in room 217. As the on-call relationship counselor for the county, I'd seen my share of midnight meltdowns, but something about this place made my skin prickle. A staff member materialized at my car door. Her name tag read Joy. Her smile was too wide, too practiced. Dr. Franklin, we're so grateful you came. She moved with uncanny smoothness, as if her joints worked differently than they should. Where are they? I grabbed my counselor's bag from the passenger seat. Muscle memory from my years as a research scientist making me check that my notebook and pens were in their usual pockets. Old habits die hard, even though I'd left pharmaceutical research for relationship counseling years ago. Joy's head tilted exactly 45 degrees. Oh, the Bennetts? They're quite calm now. Our in-house therapist managed to stabilize the situation. I still need to evaluate them. I followed her through glass doors into a lobby that smelled of lavender and something else. Something metallic and organic. Of course. Joy's heels clicked in perfect rhythm across marble floors. Her movements never faltered, like a dancer who had rehearsed the same routine thousands of times. The Bennett's room was at the end of a long hallway lined with identical doors. Joy knocked 3 times, each tap precisely spaced. Mark Bennett opened the door, and I had to check my intake photo to confirm it was really him. The man in my photo had wild eyes and a week's worth of stubble. This Mark was clean-shaven, his expression serene. Behind him, Lisa Bennett sat perched on the edge of their bed, hands folded neatly in her lap. In my photo, she'd had a split lip and mascara-stained cheeks. Now her makeup was flawless. Dr. Franklin. Mark stepped back, his movements as fluid as Joy's. We're so sorry to have troubled you. I stepped into their room, noting how they moved in perfect synchronization. I understand things got heated earlier. Lisa's laugh tinkled like wind chimes. Did they? It seems silly now. We can't even remember what we were fighting about. You can't remember? I pulled out my notebook, watching as they exchanged a glance that lasted exactly 2 seconds. The resort's therapy methods are... Mark paused for precisely 3 seconds. Very effective. Could you tell me about these methods? I forced myself to maintain eye contact with Lisa, whose pupils seemed to contract and expand like a camera lens adjusting its focus. Joy cleared her throat from the doorway. I'm sure Dr. Franklin doesn't need to trouble herself with our proprietary techniques. The Bennetts are clearly doing much better. Lisa nodded, the motion too smooth, like animation rather than natural movement. We've never been better. The resort has restored us to our true selves. A chill ran down my spine as both Bennetts smiled at exactly the same moment, their teeth too white, too perfect. And when they blinked, I could have sworn I saw a second set of eyelids sliding horizontally across their eyes. My pen shook as I made notes, forcing myself to maintain a professional demeanor. Something was deeply wrong here, but I couldn't put my finger on what. The Bennetts moved in perfect mirrored motions, like synchronized swimmers performing above ground. And this change happened during today's therapy session? I kept my voice steady, clinical. Mark's hand found Lisa's, their fingers interlacing with mechanical precision. The resort's methods are quite... His head twitched, almost imperceptibly. Transformative. A sound like wet leather stretching came from somewhere behind their perfect smiles. Lisa's neck elongated slightly, just for a moment, before snapping back to normal proportions. Had I imagined it? Dr. Franklin. Joy stepped closer, her shadow on the wall seeming to writhe independently of her body. Perhaps we should let the happy couple rest. I pretended to check my phone. Actually, I need to file an immediate report. Could you show me to an office? The Bennetts spoke in unison. Goodbye, Dr. Franklin. We're so very happy now. Joy guided me down the hallway, her heels still clicking that perfect rhythm. As we turned the corner, I glanced back. The Bennetts stood in their doorway, still holding hands, still smiling. They hadn't moved an inch. Our administrative office is in the East Wing. Joy gestured to a dark corridor. Though perhaps you'd prefer to see our therapy facilities first? We have an opening in the next session. My heart hammered against my ribs. The office will be fine. She led me past a series of doors marked Restoration in Progress. From behind one, I heard what might have been screaming or might have been laughter. It was impossible to tell. The administrative office was a sterile space with a single computer terminal. Through an interior window, I could see into what looked like a chemical storage room, shelves lined with carefully labeled compounds. The organization system was familiar, similar to what we'd used in my old pharmaceutical lab. My eyes caught on one container marked catalytic enzyme, before Joy's movement drew my attention back to her. Joy's smile never wavered as she turned to leave. Take all the time you need. Someone will check on you shortly. The door clicked shut behind her. I immediately began searching through the client files, my hands trembling as I typed. The database was extensive, with hundreds of couples listed over the past year. Each file ended with the same note: fully restored. A notification popped up on the screen. Next restoration session beginning in 15 o'clock minutes. All staff report to Chamber 7. Through the office's small window, I watched Joy and 3 other staff members glide past, their movements synchronized, their shadows stretching and twisting in ways that defied physics. Something dark and sinuous writhed beneath the fabric of Joy's uniform. I had to get out of here, had to warn someone. But when I tried the door, it wouldn't budge. From somewhere deep in the building, I heard the distinct sound of pods opening. I yanked harder at the door handle, my heart threatening to explode. The sound of wet, organic movement echoed through the ventilation system above me. Something was dripping from the ceiling. Clear, viscous fluid that smelled like formaldehyde mixed with honeysuckle. My phone had no signal, but I used it as a flashlight to examine the office. There had to be another way out. The window was sealed shut. Thick, double-paned glass that wouldn't break without making enough noise to alert whatever those things were. A rhythmic squelching sound came from behind the wall. I pressed my ear against it, then immediately recoiled. The wall was warm, pulsing. The computer screen flickered. New entries were being added to the database in real time. Bennett, Mark, and Lisa. Restoration complete. Rodriguez, James, and Maria. Entering final phase. Watson, David, and Sarah. Processing begins. My fingers flew across the keyboard, opening files at random. Each couple's before and after photos showed subtle differences. Microscopic changes in facial structure, slight alterations in eye color. Changes so small that no one would notice unless they were looking for them. The ventilation grate above me creaked. Something dark and oily dripped onto my shoulder. I bit back a scream and dove under the desk just as the grate crashed to the floor. A long, segmented appendage snaked down from the opening, its surface rippling with what looked like thousands of tiny mouths. Dr. Franklin. Joy's voice came from the ventilation shaft, but it wasn't quite her voice anymore. It was multiple voices layered together, speaking in perfect harmony. We've been watching your work with troubled couples. Such a high success rate. You'd be a wonderful addition to our staff. The tentacle-like appendage swept across the floor, searching. I held my breath, watching it move past my hiding spot. Everyone needs restoration eventually, Dr. Franklin. Even counselors. Especially counselors. We can help you become your perfect self. The door clicked open. I peered out from under the desk to see multiple sets of feet entering the room, all moving in that same unnatural synchronization. I had seconds to make a decision. The ventilation shaft was open above me, leading God knows where. The door was open, but at least 5 staff members blocked it. And somewhere in this building, real people were being processed, replaced, restored. The tentacle reversed direction, moving back toward my hiding spot. I had to choose. Now. Looking back, I still wonder if I made the right decision when I lunged from beneath the desk and charged the group at the door. Their perfect formation broke for just a second, a critical mistake. I slipped between Joy and another staff member, feeling something slick and cold brush against my neck as I broke through. The hallway stretched before me, doors marked "Restoration in Progress" lining both sides. Behind one, I heard Maria Rodriguez screaming. Angie, her husband's name. James! James! That's not you! That's not... Her voice cut off with a wet gurgle. I ran faster, my shoes squeaking on the polished floor. Behind me, the staff moved in perfect unison, their footsteps creating a rhythmic drumbeat that seemed to shake the building's foundation. Dr. Chen. Their voices harmonized into one overwhelming chorus. Don't you want to see our methods? Don't you want to understand true restoration? I rounded a corner and froze. Through a large observation window, I saw into what must have been Chamber 7. A couple, the Watsons, according to the database, were strapped to identical chairs facing each other. Their skin had turned translucent, and something dark moved beneath it, like ink dropped in water. But it was more than just movement. I could see their very essence being pulled apart, molecule by molecule, their humanity unraveling like a sweater caught on a nail. Mrs. Watson's mouth opened in a silent scream as dark threads seemed to weave themselves through her flesh, following her veins, wrapping around her bones. Her husband reached for her with trembling fingers, but where their hands should have touched, the space between them rippled and bent, as if reality itself was being reorganized. Between them stood what I first thought was another staff member, but as it turned toward the window, I saw its true form in the reflection. A writhing mass of tentacles and eyes, wearing human skin like an ill-fitting suit. The skin bubbled and shifted, struggling to maintain its shape around the impossible geometry of the thing beneath. Each of its many eyes fixed on me with terrible intelligence. and I understood with crushing certainty that I was seeing something that had existed long before humans first crawled from the oceans. The thing saw me. All of its eyes blinked at once, a rippling wave of organic shutters that moved in perfect, nauseating synchronization. The Watsons' bodies began to dissolve, their essence flowing through tubes into large, organic-looking pods that pulsed with sickly light. The pods themselves seemed to breathe, their surfaces rippling with peristaltic movements. As I watched, horrified, their dissolving forms tried to reach for each other one last time, but their fingers had already begun to split and branch like roots seeking water, spreading and thinning until they were nothing but a fine mist of organic matter. The tubes carried this essence not in one direction, but in impossible spirals that seemed to loop back on themselves through spaces that shouldn't exist. In one terrible moment, I saw Mrs. Watson's face suspended in the fluid, her expression caught between terror and ecstasy as her features began to realign themselves according to some alien geometry. Inside each pod, I could make out humanoid shapes forming, perfect duplicates, down to the last detail. My gut twisted as I realized what I was watching, the complete eradication of two human beings, replaced by something wearing their faces. Their memories weren't being transferred. They were being curated, edited, sanitized. Everything that made them unique, every flaw and quirk and private moment that made them who they were, was being systematically erased. Beautiful, isn't it? Joy's voice came from directly behind me, a chorus of whispers layered beneath her words. We remove all the flaws, all the discord. We make love perfect. I spun around. Joy's face had begun to slip, revealing something dark and glistening underneath. Her smile stretched impossibly wide, splitting her face vertically. The tear revealed pulsing tissue that seemed to exist in too many dimensions at once, folding in on itself in ways that made my eyes water. The other staff members emerged from both ends of the hallway, their skin rippling as whatever lived inside them began to emerge. Their movements were no longer simply synchronized. They moved like a single organism experiencing itself from multiple perspectives simultaneously. I backed against the observation window, feeling its warmth against my back. Inside Chamber 7, the pods were opening. The pods split open with a wet, tearing sound that reminded me of birth, but wrong, a mockery of creation. The things that emerged wore the Watsons' faces, but moved like marionettes learning to use their strings. Their joints bent in impossible directions as they tested their new forms, skin stretching and contracting as the entities inside learned to pilot their stolen vessels. Behind me, Joy's face had completely split, revealing a mass of writhing tentacles and glittering eyes. Each eye reflected a different version of me, versions where I had already been restored, where my humanity had been scraped away and replaced with perfect, hollow symmetry. A fire alarm caught my attention, bright red against the sterile wall. Next to it sat a metal trash can. I grabbed the can and hurled it through the observation window. Glass shattered. Alarms screamed. The sprinkler system activated, but instead of water, a thick, yellowish liquid rained down. It sizzled where it touched the creature's artificial skin, making them shriek in harmonized agony. I dove through the broken window, feeling glass slice into my shoulder. The Watson things reached for me with two long fingers, their joints bending backwards. I scrambled past them, knocking over a cart of medical instruments. The tubes connecting the chairs to the pods ripped loose, spraying dark fluid across the floor. "The vessels!" Joy's many voices shrieked. "Save the vessels!" I spotted a door marked Processing Laboratory and ran for it. Inside, rows of pods lined the walls, each containing a half-formed duplicate. Names I recognized from the database were printed on small screens above them. The Rodriguezes, the Mitchells, the Kahns, dozens of couples in various stages of restoration. At the center of the room stood a massive tank filled with swirling black liquid. Something massive moved within it, something with too many limbs and too many eyes. As I watched, it extended a tentacle toward me, and I saw my own face beginning to form at its tip. The door burst open. The staff, now fully shed of their human disguises, poured in. Behind them came the duplicate couples, moving in perfect, terrible synchronization. I grabbed a container labeled catalytic enzyme and hurled it into the tank. The liquid began to boil. The creature inside thrashed, its tentacles smashing pods and equipment. No! Joy's thing reached for me with multiple limbs. You're destroying perfection! The tank cracked. Dark fluid sprayed everywhere, dissolving the duplicates it touched. They melted like wax figures, revealing twisted masses of tissue underneath their human facades. I ran. Behind me, explosions rocked the facility as the enzyme reacted with whatever hellish substances they used in their restoration process. The sprinklers continued to rain burning liquid. The perfectly maintained halls of Mountain Pines Couples Retreat began to collapse. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. As I sped down the mountain, I watched in my rearview mirror as the resort burned, black smoke twisting into shapes that seemed to reach for the sky with elongated fingers. That was 3 months ago. The official story blamed a gas leak for the destruction of Mountain Pines. The couples who had been restored there still walk among us, still move with that too-perfect synchronization. Sometimes I see them in the grocery store, at restaurants, in my own neighborhood. They're spreading. And sometimes, late at night, I examine my reflection very carefully. I check for signs that my movements are becoming too smooth, too practiced. I watch for any hint that my smile is growing too wide, because I can't be sure, can never be sure, that I made it out before they began my restoration.
The ancient brass bell above the door chimed as I stepped into Woodhaven Bed and Breakfast, bringing with me a swirl of February snow and the kind of bone-deep cold that makes you wonder if you'll ever feel warm again. I hadn't planned to stop here. Hadn't planned to stop anywhere, really. Just pointed my car north and drove, trying to put as many miles as possible between me and the house where Mom's hospice bed still sat empty, her favorite orange-spiced pancake recipe still pinned to the fridge with a magnet shaped like her favorite flower. 300 miles, and I could still smell the antiseptic, still hear the monitor's final beep. The lobby was a riot of red and pink paper hearts dangling from the ceiling, velvet cupids perched on every surface, bouquets of roses that looked too perfect to be real. A string of Valentine's lights cast everything in a soft crimson glow. It seemed excessive for October, but maybe they just really loved the holiday. The air smelled of cinnamon and vanilla, but underneath lurked something else, something metallic and wrong, like the way Mom's room had smelled near the end, when every breath rattled with, "No, I wasn't going to think about that. Not today. Not with all these hearts everywhere, mocking the one that had stopped beating too soon." A glass bowl on the front desk held heart-shaped cookies, each one decorated with delicate pink icing. The sign beside them read, "Love's First Kiss Cookies, Help Yourself," in elaborate calligraphy. Something about the handwriting seemed familiar, though I couldn't place why. An elderly couple materialized from behind the front desk, stepping through a cascade of paper hearts. The woman's silver hair was styled in perfect victory rolls, her red lipstick too bright against her pale skin. Her husband's bow tie was patterned with tiny cupids, and his carefully waxed mustache curled like the tail of a valentine. The woman's hand fluttered to her throat. "Oh, Herbert, look, another Valentine's visitor." Her fingers were spider-like, nails painted the color of dried blood. Herbert shuffled forward, brass keys jangling. "Welcome to Woodhaven, my dear. We've been expecting you." I hadn't made a reservation. As they led me up the creaking stairs, my eyes caught on the framed photographs lining the wall, dozens of them spanning decades. The same couple, the same poses, the same clothes, dated 1974, 1985, 1999, 2015. Not a wrinkle gained, not a hair gone gray. I paused at a photo from last Valentine's Day. Martha and Herbert stood in their usual pose by the fireplace, but there was something wrong with the third figure seated in the armchair beside them. The man's face was turned slightly away, but I could see enough. The dark hair streaked with gray, the familiar slope of the nose, the small scar on the jaw from a childhood bicycle accident. My scar, my face, but aged, worn, like looking into a funhouse mirror that showed 30 years into the future. "Come along, dear," Martha called from above, her voice sharp. When I looked back at the photograph, the chair was empty. Just Martha and Herbert, smiling their perfect smiles, unchanging as ever. My room key felt ice cold against my palm. The woman, she'd introduced herself as Martha, patted my cheek with fingers that burned like frost. "Dinner's at 6 sharp, dear. Don't be late." The room was all Victorian frills and faded wallpaper, dominated by a massive oval mirror in a tarnished brass frame. As I set my overnight bag down, something flickered in the glass, a ripple, like heat waves off summer pavement. For a split second, my reflection looked different. Older, maybe? When I stepped closer, the mirror showed only my usual tired face, but something about my image seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at it, like the glass was trying to tell me something. I pried at the frame, curious. It lifted easily from its hook, surprisingly light for its size. The back was covered in strange symbols that seemed to move when I tried to focus on them. I quickly hung it back up, but not before slipping the small hand mirror from my toiletry bag between the frame and the wall. Something about this place had my instincts screaming, and I'd learned to listen to them during those long nights in Mom's hospice room. The love letter appeared while I was in the bathroom. I'd only stepped away for a moment, but there it sat on my pillow cream-colored paper, red wax seal, my name written in perfect calligraphy. I hadn't told them my name. My fingers trembled as they broke the seal. The paper smelled of roses and copper. "Dearest Michael, your presence fills these halls with such sweet youth. We've waited so long for someone like you. Won't you stay? Won't you share your love with us? Always, M and H." The words seemed to writhe on the page, burrowing into my mind like worms. My vision blurred. The room spun. I fell onto the bed, the letter clutched against my chest. I dreamed of others who'd slept in this room. A young woman in bell-bottoms, reading an identical letter. A man in 80s business wear, his face melting like candle wax as he slept. A college student with a smartphone, aging decades in minutes. They all read the letters. They all stayed for breakfast. I woke to morning light, and Martha's laughter floating up from downstairs. Something felt wrong before I even opened my eyes. A deep, bone-settling ache in my joints, like I'd run a marathon in my sleep. When I tried to push myself up, my knuckles crackled like bubble wrap. The bathroom tiles were ice cold against my feet as I shuffled to the mirror. At first, I thought there was something wrong with the glass, a warping maybe, or a film of grime making everything look slightly off. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes. The distortion remained. My face wasn't my face anymore. Oh, it was still recognizably me, but wrong. The smooth skin around my eyes had crinkled into crow's feet. Laugh lines bracketed my mouth, lines I'd seen forming on my father's face, lines I shouldn't have for another decade at least. My cheeks had lost their fullness, the skin beginning to sag in a way that spoke of years, not hours. No, no, no. I leaned closer, my trembling fingers tracing each new line, each subtle collapse of youth. That's when I saw it, a glint of silver at my temple. I grabbed a fistful of hair, pulling it forward where I could see it clearly. Gray strands threaded through the brown like steel wool, starting at the roots and spreading outward like frost across a window. I stumbled backward, catching myself on the towel rack. My hands. God, my hands. The skin had grown thin as tissue paper, blue veins standing out in stark relief. A liver spot bloomed across my left knuckle as I watched, spreading like spilled ink. This wasn't possible. This wasn't happening. I'd gone to bed 28 years old. The man in the mirror had to be pushing 40 at least. I pinched my arm, hard enough to bruise, hoping to wake up. The skin stayed tented for a moment before slowly smoothing out, its elasticity already failing. When I tried to scream, my voice caught in my throat. Even that felt different, rougher, aged by invisible years. And there, waiting on my pillow when I staggered back into the bedroom, a second letter waited, the red wax seal gleaming like fresh blood. The breakfast table wouldn't be set until 9, leaving me time to explore. Each step down the hallway felt like walking through molasses, the air thick with decades of trapped time. A leather-bound guest book lay open on an antique side table. I flipped through its pages, my newly aching fingers trembling, the same pattern repeated. Solo travelers, signed in but never signed out. Their handwriting grew shaky towards their final entries, as if written by arthritic hands. Movement caught my eye, a figure at the end of the hall, barely visible in the shadows. An ancient man in a tattered robe, his withered frame hunched over like a question mark. He didn't so much walk as drift toward me, his feet never quite seeming to touch the floor. As he passed, his rheumy eyes locked with mine, and his paper-dry lips parted. "The pancakes," he whispered, his voice like autumn leaves scraping concrete. "They taste like memory." I blinked, and he was gone. Only the lingering scent of mothballs and aftershave suggested he'd been there at all. Martha's heels clicked against hardwood as she set a plate before me. "Our special Valentine's breakfast, dear. Eat up." The scent hit me first, chocolate chip pancakes with a hint of orange zest, exactly how my mother made them. Down to the slightly burnt edges she could never quite avoid. My heart clenched. After 15 years, how could they know? Herbert appeared with a steaming mug and a heart-shaped cookie from the front desk bowl. The coffee's aroma transported me instantly to Sunday mornings in high school. Dad's special roast, the one he'd mail order from that tiny shop in Seattle. He died before I graduated, but this was his coffee, right down to the hint of cardamom he'd always added. "Go on, Michael." Herbert's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Don't let it get cold. And do try the cookie. It might remind you of someone special." The first bite of pancake tasted like being 10 years old. Like Mom's laugh and the way she'd dance while flipping pancakes. Like Dad reading the newspaper, pretending not to notice when I stole his coffee. Like summer mornings and safety and love. I bit into the cookie. The taste hit me like a physical blow. Jenny Chen's lips against mine behind the school gymnasium. My very first kiss. The nervous flutter in my stomach. The scent of her mother's laundry detergent on her cardigan. The way the whole world seemed to stop for just that one perfect moment. My fork clattered to the plate. The veins in my hands stood out like rivers on an ancient map. Skin tissue paper thin. But I couldn't stop eating. Each bite was another memory. Christmas morning cocoa, Grandma's kitchen, every first kiss, every last goodbye. Memories so sharp and sweet they brought tears to my eyes. Red paper hearts danced in my peripheral vision, their shadows writhing on the walls like living things. A Cupid figurine on the mantelpiece turned its head to watch me, its cherubic smile too wide, showing too many teeth. "Through food we share love," Martha whispered, refilling my cup with what smelled exactly like the tea my best friend David used to make when my heart was broken. "Through love, we share life." I tried to stand, to run, but the dining room door had vanished, and suddenly there was fresh apple pie in front of me, Mom's secret recipe, the one I'd never written down because she'd always be there to make it, the one that died with her. "Just one more bite," Herbert coaxed, and his voice sounded like my father's. "One more memory. You can live it all again." The hallway stretched impossibly long, every door leading back to this table, this moment, these meals that tasted like stolen time. My hands were wrinkled now, spotted with age, but the food... God, the food tasted like everything I'd ever loved and lost. The hidden door appeared when I pressed the spot where the wallpaper pattern broke. Inside, the air reeked of decay and old paper. They hung like cocoons, withered husks of former guests suspended from the ceiling. But no, not cocoons, more like tea bags, I realized with horror. Their desiccated bodies were being slowly dipped into massive copper vats that bubbled with something thick and red. With each dip, the liquid grew clearer, and the bodies grew more withered. Some still moved, still breathed. One turned its head as I passed, lips cracked and bleeding, eyes clouded with cataracts. "The memories," it wheezed. "They take them first, then the youth, then the love. But they leave just enough life that you can feel yourself fading, just enough awareness to know what you're losing." The walls were lined with glass jars, each one glowing with a soft, pulsing light. I stepped closer, drawn despite myself. Inside each jar swirled what looked like liquid light, and in that light, scenes played out in endless loops. A wedding dance, a child's first steps, a Christmas morning, a last goodbye, all the love they'd stolen, bottled and preserved like jam. We were cursed by love. Martha and Herbert stood in the doorway, their perfect faces finally showing cracks. Condemned to feed on it, to steal it, to stay together forever. Each memory we serve, each moment of joy we let you taste again, it feeds our curse, keeps us bound to each other through the years. Herbert's smile split his face like a wound. But you'll help us, won't you, Michael? You'll share your love, your youth, your life. We can give you back every moment you've lost, every person taken too soon. Just a few more bites. Their fingers elongated into claws. Their mouths gaped to reveal rows of needle teeth, and I could see bits of other people's memories caught between them, glinting like gold fillings. My hand brushed against my pocket, finding the small mirror I'd taken earlier. The mirror that had tried to warn me. Understanding clicked into place. All those shifting reflections, the symbols that wouldn't stay still. This wasn't just a mirror, it was a truth teller, designed to reflect reality no matter how twisted it became. I ripped it from my pocket, held it up like a shield. In its surface, I saw Martha and Herbert as they truly were. Ancient, hungry things wearing masks of humanity. Their own magic reflected back at them, a feedback loop of temporal hunger. Martha screamed as her skin crackled, age catching up like a tidal wave. Herbert's bones crumbled to dust inside his pristine suit. The house shuddered. Reality bent. I ran through corridors that twisted like DNA strands, past photos that burned and guest books that bled. I burst through the front door into snow that fell upward, into a night that felt like rebirth. The Woodhaven bed and breakfast collapsed behind me, folding in on itself like origami in reverse, but I could feel it wasn't truly gone, just waiting, hungry. My hands still bore the wrinkles of stolen time. My hair remained streaked with gray. The mirror in my pocket pulsed with ancient power, and sometimes when I look into it I see flickers of other faces, all the people Martha and Herbert consumed over the years. Their stolen moments play across its surface like movies projected on fog, and each one whispers to me about other places like Woodhaven, other monsters wearing masks of eternal love. I knew I'd spend the rest of my life hunting them down. Love letters are still being written.